Welcome back to the Dershow. Before we get to the Supreme Court and abortion, I want to just talk a little bit about Hunter Biden. He and his lawyer did a gutsy thing today. They defied a subpoena and they said, look, if you want to see me testify, let's do it in public. What do you have to hide? And the Republicans said, no, you have to testify in private first, and maybe then we'll allow you to testify in public. I think Hunter Biden wins in the court of public opinion on this one. Americans want to know why does Congress want this in private? Why don't they just have it in public so everybody can see it? But legally, probably he doesn't win. Probably the courts say, look, we're not going to tell Congress how to conduct their business. If they want to do secret depositions first, we may not agree with it, we may not approve of it, but it doesn't violate the Constitution. So in the end, I suspect that the contempt proceedings against Hunter Biden will be upheld. One never knows for sure, just like one never knows for sure what the Supreme Court will decide. But the most likely result is that Hunter Biden prevails in the court of public opinion. People say, gee, I think he's probably right about that. And he loses in the court of law. I'm sure his lawyers thought this through because they're very good, particularly Abby Lowell, who is his main lawyer, who was with him today in front of Congress. All right, let's turn to the Supreme Court. Remember when the Supreme Court decided to overrule Roe versus Wade, I made a prediction. I said this is going to create a terrible problem for them because if there is no constitutional right to an abortion at all, then a state could eliminate the morning after pill and could say, look, nobody who gets pregnant can have any termination of pregnancy. And the American public would not accept that. The vast majority of Americans, even those evangelical Christians or Catholics who believe it is a fundamental issue from God that abortion is not proper, would not vote to not allow the morning after pill or the week after pill. So I expressed the concern that the court had gotten itself into a corner by saying there's no right at all to abortion under the Constitution. It's up to the state, because there are going to be a couple of states that will say no, not from day one. Well, that issue has come to the Supreme Court today. The Supreme Court granted review in two cases that raises the pill issue, but raises it in a different context. And it gives the court probably a way out. What happened in this case is that the Drug Administration said this pill is okay. It's a pill that allows a woman to terminate a pregnancy within a period of time, not as long a period of time as the pro-choice people want it, and too much a time for the right to life people, but it's a kind of compromise pill. And then the case was taken to court by a group of anti-abortion people, and the initial decision by a very carefully selected judge who was anti-abortion essentially said no, the FDA should not have approved the pill. And then it went to the Court of Appeals, which has a divided opinion and says, yeah, some uses of the pill are okay, others are not. And the Biden administration decided to appeal it, taking a real chance, because, when you put the case in the hands of the Supreme Court, you never know how it's going to come out. It may come out for you, it may come out against you. But they decided to do that. And cert was granted today. That means at least 4 justices voted to review the case. It may mean 5, it may mean 9. We don't know. We don't ever learn the secret proceedings of the Supreme Court and how many people and which people voted for and against deciding the case. As Justice Brandeis many years ago once said, the most important decisions we make is deciding not to decide, deciding which cases to reject and which cases to accept. And in this case, they accepted it. And I suspect this is not a prediction, because I'm very serious about my predictions all coming true. So far, I've been batting about 100% on predictions. So I'm not going to make a prediction. I'm just going to assess the situation. I do think that there's a strong likelihood the Supreme Court saw these cases, which are not the most natural cases to take for review, as a way out of the dilemma that I posed for them. because this is not a state saying you can't have an abortion. This is the federal government. And the decision of the Supreme Court said, leave it to the states. So this is the federal government and the Federal Drug Administration. And I think that it will give the Supreme Court the opportunity to, I hate to say split the baby in a Solomonic way in an abortion context, but split the difference. And it will probably allow the Supreme Court, and probably there'll be 9 opinions or 12 opinions or 5 opinions, but there won't be just one opinion or one opinion and one dissenting opinion. Abortion is too emotional an issue for that. I suspect the court will figure out a way of giving something to the pro-choice people in terms of allowing the pill, which is really a major, major factor in the reality of women getting abortions without medical care. Under the Court of Appeals opinions, you have to have a doctor. You have to see the doctor several times during the pregnancy. It poses a burden, but not an insuperable burden on abortion. So I suspect we're going to see some compromise that's going to be reached, and it's not going to make either side happy. I have friends who say that abortion should be allowed till the very end of pregnancy. Obviously not if the baby is alive and viable, but toward the very end of pregnancy. And I have people I know who say it shouldn't be allowed from the very moment of conception. The case in Texas that is about to be decided, and I don't think the Supreme Court will take that case, is a really, really tragic case. You have a woman who gets pregnant, and she's told by her doctors, and we have to assume the doctors are accurate here, that the baby is going to be born dead. And not only that, but if she goes to term and gives birth to a dead baby, likely she will not be able to have any other babies. And how dare the government deny anybody the right to have a baby? I thought that had been decided after Harvard, and many people in Harvard supported sterilization of imbeciles. And the Supreme Court, in a horrible opinion, upheld the right of the state to sterilize people, deny them the right to have children. That decision has been overruled, certainly in the court of public opinion. And I don't think any court would ever today deny any citizen the right to have a child. But in the Texas case, there was a possibility, according to the doctor, a substantial possibility, that if this woman were forced to carry her dead baby to term, or her likely dead baby to term, it wasn't 100% certain, the result might be that she was not capable of having children. She moved out of state and to another state, and she will have an abortion. But not everybody has the ability to move out of state. And I guess you can have state statutes that prohibit you from moving out of state, or prohibit another state from doing what your state won't do. Those cases will come up as well. Excuse me. So we're in the thick of it now with abortion. I don't think either of these cases will get to the core question. And here I will make a prediction. I don't think the Supreme Court will actually hold that if a state permits or forbids a pregnant woman from taking a morning after pill, that is, she has sex on Tuesday and she realizes she had unprotected sex and might be pregnant. She doesn't know if she's pregnant, but she's either pregnant or not, either conception has occurred or not, that if a state says even the day after you can't take the pill, I don't think the Supreme Court's going to uphold that. They'll find a way around that, by the way. How do you enforce something like that? I guess you enforce it by making the pills illegal. Of course, there'll be a black market for the pills. Women are just not going to accept a state telling them that the day after they had sex, they can't prevent pregnancy. And maybe the Supreme Court will figure out that's really not abortion. Abortion requires a certain number of days, perhaps weeks, before there is really a fetus. These are all biological issues that people debate all the time. I wrote a book about this subject. Look, I've written a book about every subject. I wrote a book called Killing how the law decides issues of life and death. And in it, I have a long chapter on abortion, in which I talk about basically very, very early abortion, which the vast majority of Americans support, very, very late abortion, which the vast majority of Americans don't support. And then the issue is, how big is the middle? We have candidates today running in the Republican primary. Some say 10 weeks, some say 15 weeks, some say a national rule, some say leave it to the states. The one thing that we can be sure of is that this issue and the Supreme Court's decision to overrule Roe versus Wade, which it never had to do. The issue wasn't even presented to the Supreme Court. The only issue presented to the Supreme Court was a Mississippi statute which prohibited abortion after 15 weeks. Was that constitutional? But the Supreme Court reached in and held Roe versus Wade reversed, and that probably cost the Republicans lots of seats in the House and the Senate in the midterm elections, and conceivably may cost them the election. So, the conservative Supreme Court appointed by Republicans did not help Republicans. And these issues are going to be watched very carefully, because these are not issues of the brain as much as they are issues of the heart and the soul. And, it's not like race-based affirmative action. Everybody has a woman in their family. Everybody has a daughter. Everybody has a sister. Everybody has an aunt, a cousin, a niece. And if you're a woman, it's possible you will become pregnant and need to or want to have an abortion. So this is an issue that affects every single American, no matter what your background is, no matter what your economic background, your racial background, your religious background. And the Supreme Court is going to be faced with some terrible choices. And in this case, will probably give us some hint. My sense is that Chief Justice Roberts, who is no longer the swing vote, he is a swing vote, but he needs another to swing. But perhaps with Justice Kavanaugh, perhaps with Justice Barrett, may come to some compromise position. Now, the problem with abortion is there are a lot of people that don't believe you should compromise at all on both sides. And I analyze this in my Killing book, that there are people who really, really do believe from the second of conception, it's a human being with a soul, and others who believe that it's just a fetus until 5 minutes before it's born. Those two extreme positions are not accepted by the American public, but the American public is deeply divided as to where to draw the line. If the Supreme Court had upheld 15 weeks, I think that would not satisfy me. I would want more than 15 weeks, but I think the vast majority of Americans would not have been as upset as they were with the overruling of Roe versus Wade. And so, we're going to wait and see how the Supreme Court decides the case. Cert granted now, which means oral arguments could conceivably happen at the very end of the term. Most likely not. Let's see, you need a certain number of days for the brief, a number of the reply brief, and then the reply brief after that. It's a close question as to whether or not this decision will be rendered before or after the election. I suspect it will be rendered after the election. That's a prediction. I'll make that a prediction, that the Supreme Court decision will come after the 2024 election, not before. And so the decision itself probably will not influence the election. So that's where we are. We have a slightly shorter podcast today because I have to light the Hanukkah menorah in a Chabad ceremony today in Florida. And so I have to leave a little earlier than usual. But let's do some letters, and then we'll make up for it sometime. Okay. Alan Dershowitz for president of Harvard. We need him to straighten the mess out and to build back confidence in this great institution of higher learning. When I was I was the youngest professor in Harvard's history, so I became, kind of well-known among academics, and a number of schools wondered whether I would be willing to become president or dean. And I looked in the mirror and I said, that's not for me. I'm not somebody who has to bring people together and compromise. I'm somebody who has to be able to speak my mind. And so I never wanted to be a president or a dean, and never would, certainly not at my age. I would think regarding the Trump appeal that the position of the Trump team would be that the appeals process should follow its normal course. I can't see how it would be in Trump's interest to fast track this. I agree with you. And that's what the special counsel is trying to do, fast track this. But it's a tough call for the Supreme Court to decide whether it will accept an appeal from the winning side, because it wants to make sure that its win is not only affirmed by the Court of Appeals, but by the Supreme Court as well, which is final. As the Robert Jackson once said, we're final, not because we're right. We're only right because we're final. So the Supreme Court has made a lot of wrong decisions over the years. Okay. Difficult for Harvard to have a worse advertisement than me. So I'm the worst advertisement for Harvard, I guess. President Gay is the best advertisement. Good. Pick another school or pick another advertisement for Harvard. I don't claim to be an advertisement for Harvard. From the day I got there, I was a dissenter. I dissented. I voted against race-based affirmative action in the 1970s. This has been a long-term view of mine. You know, the one thing you cannot accuse me of is inconsistency. I am boringly consistent. I haven't changed my mind about any major issue since the Brooklyn Dodgers left in 1957, left Brooklyn. I am a stodgy, old, consistent person who believes in principles, and principles don't change. Principles remain the same. They have to adapt to new circumstances, but they remain the same. I could care less what happens to Harvard. Well, you should care what happens to Harvard, because what happens to Harvard happens to many other institutions. Harvard is the leading institution in the United States, for better or worse, and what Harvard does, other schools do. So if you love another school, you should care about what happened to Harvard. Professor, I'm going to tell you again, I'm losing all respect for you. How can you say you don't think she, that is President Gay, committed plagiarism when a bunch of scholars said she did? Here's my view on that. There are a lot of things that she did where she copied almost verbatim quotes or statements that were made by other scholars. But in most cases, she cited the scholars. Now, she shouldn't have quoted them verbally, word for word, even if she cited them, unless she put it in quotes. That's not plagiarism. That's a kind of micro citation problem. There is at least one case that I found, and I looked at this pretty closely, where she quotes from an author very directly and doesn't cite the author. And the author herself said, that's plagiarism. Close case, close case. I don't think enough to disqualify a person from being president. There are much better reasons why she should not be president of Harvard. If my doctor graduated from Harvard, I'd ask for a second opinion. I should always ask for a second opinion, whether he graduated from Harvard or from Yale. Always ask for a second opinion. And there's an interesting phenomenon that I've noticed, and friends of mine who are doctors noticed. People get second opinions primarily when they get bad news. But when they get good news, oh, you're okay, they don't get a second opinion. And that can be a real problem too. That can be a false negative. So getting a second opinion shouldn't be only something that satisfies you if you don't like the first opinion, but even if you like the first opinion, there are probably good reasons for getting a second opinion. Okay, let's see. We'll take one or two more, and then I'm going to have to call it a day. Thank you for making clear that President Trump was speaking about the issue of removing and retaining public statues when he used the phrase good people on both sides. Look, I am not a supporter of President Trump's speech at Charlottesville. But let's be honest, he didn't say that the Nazis are good people. He condemned the Nazis. He condemned the people who said, we will not be replaced by Jews. His reference to good people on both sides was clearly a reference to the debate over whether or not a monument should be taken down. And there are good people on both sides of that. He could have phrased it better, and he could have done a better job, but let's be fair in our accusations. Okay. I think shouting fire in a crowded theater is apt because the results of the action are correctly analogous. In both cases, the action is an action that has great potential to cause mayhem, which is most like. I agree with all that. My only problem is that shouting fire in a crowded theater is not speech. It is indistinguishable from pulling an alarm, and the alarm then has a recording that says, "There is a fire, please leave, go to the exits." Or if the recording just said, "Fire, fire, fire," what's the difference between a recording that says fire and a person who says fire? Neither of them is speech. They are not appeals to the mind. They are appeals to the legs and to the adrenaline. They're not an invitation to argue. Speech is an invitation to argue. Even if somebody says we could commit genocide against the Jews. No, we shouldn't. Let me explain why. But fire is not an invitation to discussion. It's an action-oriented clang sound. And that's why I firmly believe that the analogy to shouting fire in a crowded theater has been wrong from the beginning and is always going to be wrong and should always be ignored. Okay, sorry for the short podcast today, but I'll make up for it. And happy Hanukkah. I got to go light the Hanukkah candles tonight, and an early Merry Christmas. See ya.